Okay, here's our opening prayer. Let's start. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who is faithful even when your people are faithless, who is mighty to redeem when your people are weak in every way, who is even now working to set all things right and inviting us to participate. Teach us your ways, O Lord, as we study your word. Reshape us. Make us holy as you are holy. Amen. I hope that prayer is getting more and more meaningful to you. It is for me. So, chapter 16. We started Samson last week. We looked at some of the initial stories about Samson. We found out that he had been foretold. An angel came, the angel of the Lord came and told Manoah's wife, we don't know her name, but told Manoah's wife that the son was coming and that he would begin to deliver Israel. So next we saw Samson grown up, and he's not keeping the Nazirite vow from what we can tell. He's drinking, carousing, living recklessly, not devoted to God the way he's supposed to be. He's amazingly strong and powerful, but he's using it for his own purposes. He doesn't raise an army. He doesn't help Israel. He uses his strength for vengeance. So today we get to the story of Samson and Delilah. Timothy Keller describes Samson as reckless, careless, self-centered, vengeful, not in any way devoted to God as the angel of the Lord had told his mother he should be. So Samson goes to Gaza. You remember Gaza. The Philistines have 5 cities, and they have 5 kings over the 5 cities that are loose confederation. They go together and help each other when they need to fight somebody or when they need to raid or whatever. So Samson goes down to one of the cities of Gaza. Now, he has gotten used to the strength he has. He just assumes that he'll be able to get out of any situation he gets into. He is taking his gifts of God for granted. Okay? You might want to hold that thought. Next week, we're going to finish. It's our last week, and we're going to talk about how the people of God in these stories reflect us. So hold that thought. He takes his gifts from God for granted and uses them for his own purposes. So he goes into this prostitute, and the Gazites say Samson has come here, and they surround the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, "Let us wait till the light of the morning, and then we will kill him." The Philistines hate Samson because he has made them a laughing stock. I mean, he's killing them with the jawbone of a donkey. I mean, they are just outraged by this man, and they can't do anything about it, no matter what they try. So they say, "We'll get him this time." But you know, we said before, Samson, for all his brawny strength, for all his Hulk-like qualities, he's not dumb. He's a fairly intelligent, apparently, man. So Samson lays till midnight, and at midnight he arises and he takes hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and he pulls them up. He goes out and grabs the gate, and these are the gates of the city. I mean, these aren't, like your picket fence gate out front. These are big gates. They're defensive things. He grabs them and takes them and the doorposts up out of the ground, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill. Now, what he has done is he has proved how invulnerable he is And he has at the same time left the city totally vulnerable because they don't have gates. They are at the mercy of raiders now. Okay. Now we start the story about Delilah. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Okay, this is the third woman, threes. We get threes all the way through the story. There was that first wife, that, led to all the difficulties. Then there was this woman he went to in Gaza, and now there's Delilah. But this one's different because it says he loved her. That's different. And not only that, it gives us her name. That's different. So this is a different situation. Now, my Hebrew expert friend, Robert Alter, had a really interesting take on this. He says the Valley of Sorek is an Israelite territory. All my life, I've heard that Delilah was a Philistine. I'm not sure where I got that. But Alter says he thinks she's Israelite. He thinks her name has Israelite roots even, which is interesting because that's another way she's different because the others were Philistines. And it makes her actions even worse in a way. So the lords of the Philistines, that's the kings of those 5 cities, right? The leaders, they come to the woman and they say, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him. Now, they don't want to just stop him or kill him. They want to bind him. And in ESV, it says humble him. That word is torture. They not only want to stop what he's doing, but they want to get back at him. So, we were talking about cycles of violence. Here we've got raw vengeance. We'll give you 1,100 pieces of silver. This is a vast amount of money. This is a huge amount of money. Well, she's convinced. So even though Samson loves her, we've got a sad tale here. So Delilah says to Samson, tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound that one could subdue you. Now, in the Hebrew, this sounds like playful, sexual kind of, tell me how I might tie you up and, keep your strength from coming out. Let's see. Samson says to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, I'll be weak. So she binds him. The men come in. He snaps the bowstrings, and the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah says to Samson, you mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. Bat, 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 the eyelashes, right? Come on, tell me. And he says to her, well, if they bind me with new ropes that haven't been used, then I'll be weak like any other man. So she gets ropes. She binds him. She says, the Philistines are here. He jumps up. The men rush into the chamber. He snaps the ropes off of his arms like thread. Okay. Third time. So Delilah says to Samson, you've mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he says to her, well, apparently he wore his hair braided or woven in some way because he's got this huge mass of hair, right? Because he never cuts it. And so he says, well, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into a web and then nail it to the wall, that'll do it. So they try that, and nah, it doesn't stop him at all. Okay, so 3 times and it doesn't happen. So she says to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You've mocked me 3 times. Have you not told me where your great strength lies? When she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, and his soul was vexed to death. She is nagging him incessantly. But he loves her, right? He loves her. So he told her all his heart. He said, if a razor's never come upon my head, for I've been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. Ha ha, sort of. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me and I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah sees that he's telling her the truth this time. So she tells the Philistines, okay, come on, this time we've got him. She makes him fall asleep on her knees. She calls in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she begins to torment him. There's that torture word. Now we get her true stripes, right? She is selfish, vicious, deceitful. This is a nasty piece of work. She's just not nice at all. So she torments him. Poor Samson. This time he's really in love. So she calls in the Philistines. And Samson wakes up and he thinks, oh, I always get out of things. It won't be a problem. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Look at that, verse 20. He didn't realize. So the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. He's walking around like an oxen, right? Grinding grain. But the hair on his head began to grow again. This is when the music comes up in the background. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon for their God and to rejoice. And they said, our God's given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God and they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand. The ravager of our country has killed many of us. And when their hearts were merry, when they were good and drunk, they said, call Samson that he can entertain us. Now, this is, not uncommon when you defeat an enemy to humiliate them. And, you want to gloat over your winning. So they called Samson out of prison and he entertained them. They were having a good time, right? Celebrating. Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them. The house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. That's those 5 leaders. And on the roof, there were about 3,000 more men and women who couldn't get into the house because it was so crowded. So Samson called to the Lord. Now, that in itself is interesting. Apparently, Samson's figured out that the Lord is his source of strength. So he calls to the Lord, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, oh God. But look at what he wants to do. He's still not talking about delivering Israel. That I may avenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. So he's humbled and he's recognized that God is his source, but he is still Samson. He is still a product of his culture. He is still not devoted to God the way he was intended to be. But God answers his prayer. So Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on the one, his left hand on the other. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. You've seen the movie. It's very powerful. Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those he'd killed during his life. And with that, Samson begins to deliver the Philistines into the hand of the Israelites. But it will take many more years. In fact, we won't really defeat the Philistines until we get to King David. But Samson begins to deliver the people. So, what was the source of Samson's strength? Very good. It was not his hair. It wasn't his obedience to the rules. It was God's mercy and grace that gave him his strength. Another important lesson for us. Right? Yes, Gary.
I don't know what the original language is, but as you read it and as I was looking at the NASB, it says that the Lord left Samson. The hair was already cut, it was growing back, but the Lord left Samson. That goes to part of the expressions we sometimes see where the Lord came upon someone in the older scripture. And I just was wondering what you had to say about that.
I do think it's interesting. You know, we had already talked about the Nazirite vow and how Samson didn't keep it and how he had been doing all kinds of things, you know, drinking, he'd been touching dead things, he'd been chasing Philistine women, he'd been doing all kinds of things he wasn't supposed to do. And it's interesting to me that when the last piece of the Nazirite vow, the only thing that he had kept, the hair, when he gave that up, that, I mean, you know, we talk about God turning us over to our own desires. We talk about God saying, all right, have it your way. That's what this looks like to me. And I'm also reminded of the New Testament. In our weaknesses, we're made strong. I think that applies to Samson here. But it's a sad story. It's a really sad story, and it wraps up the stories of the judges. This is the end of the judges. At the end of the chapter, you see his brothers and his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him in the family tomb. He had judged Israel for 20 years. Now, notice it doesn't say, you know, that formula that we've had on other judges, and there was peace in the land and there was rest in the land. Doesn't say that, because this time he just began to deliver the Israelites. So we get the story of Samson. Now, next week, we're going to wrap everything up and we're going to draw conclusions from these things. But before we get there, we've got to do the conclusion of the book. So you'll recall from the very first start of this study, we said that Judges opens with 2 introductory stories. Remember, we talked about all the fragments that had been written through this time, and maybe Samuel, maybe in the time of King David, all of these fragments were brought together and assembled into the book of Judges. And so there are 2 sort of introductory fragments that they have there that we looked at. Then there's the section that's the judges, all the judges that we've now covered. And then there is a conclusion where there are 2 random stories, seemingly random stories at the end. And so we're going to cover the first one today, and we'll cover the second one next week, and then we'll do our summation. But if you look in chapter 17, you'll notice that these are sort of case studies, sort of, okay, we've told you about the judges, we've told you about the people's downward spiral, we've told you the story of this period. Now here's two stories to just give you a little glimpse at daily life with these people. And not only that, but there are two stories about Levites. Now, Levites are supposed to be the priests. They're supposed to be the people that draw near to God, speak to God on behalf of the people and hear from God, for the people. The Levites are supposed to be holy men. And these two concluding stories are about Levites and how self-serving their lives are. So we're going to wrap up these stories in Judges with two heartbreaking stories. We'll do the first one today. Let me say, next week, the one that we'll cover is really heartbreaking. And if you think that it may distress you, you may want to read it in advance. You may want to join class 10 minutes in. It's a bad tale next week. But this one's not a whole lot better. So here we get chapter 17. There's this guy who lives in Ephraim. His name's Micah. And his mother says, 1,100 pieces of silver. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. It's like, okay, we have this story about Delilah and the 1,100 pieces of silver. That reminds me of another 1,100 pieces of silver. There was this guy named Micah. And his mother says, these 1,100 pieces of silver were taken. And she utters a curse on whoever stole them. Well, it upsets her son because he stole them. He don't want to be cursed. And so he comes to her and he says, I took them. And she goes, oh, well, if it's you. And then she tries to reverse the curse. She says, blessed be my son by the Lord. So he gives her back the 1,100 pieces of silver. And she says, okay, well, I'll dedicate this to the Lord. So she dedicates 200 pieces of silver to the Lord to build this idol. And Micah looks at the idol and he says, I think we might have something going on here that would be beneficial. So he sets up the image. He also gets an ephod, household gods. He ordains one of his sons, who's not a Levite, and he sets up this little shrine in his house. Now, apparently what he has in mind is this is a money-making venture because people will come through town and stop at the shrine for an omen, right? Omens were hugely common during this time. Let's check the entrails of this poor animal, and see if the gods are in favor of what's going on. Well, so he sets up this shrine. Meanwhile, there's this young man, a Levite, who's been living in Bethlehem. He's an itinerant priest. He travels from one place to another, and he'll stay or sojourn in a place for a little while, and then he'll go to another place and stay for a little while. He shows up, and Micah says, cool. Hey, would you be the priest in my shrine? Because you're a Levite. Even better. So the priest is convinced because Micah offers him money, room and board. Hey, it's a good deal. So this priest is sort of self-serving in his approach to all of this, you might say. So Micah's happy. He's got a priest that's a Levite. Chapter 18. Okay. Meanwhile, the Danites have lost their territory to the Philistines. If you look at your map, you can see there's an area for Dan down here in the Philistine area, and they've apparently lost the battle. They don't have their territory anymore. Now, if you look up at the top of the map, you see a town named Dan. That's what this story is about. So they're looking for some property, someplace they can live. And they send out 5 to go explore the land. And when they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So I don't know if they'd known him from before because he's itinerant, right? He'd moved around. Or if they heard his accent and knew that he'd been from another part of, I don't know. But anyway, they heard him. So they approach him and they say, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, Micah hired me. I'm his priest." And they say, "Oh, well, inquire of God for us that we may know whether the journey will be successful." And the priest says, very hedgingly, "Go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of the Lord." He doesn't know. And he's not giving them any real information. So they go up to Laish and they find the people who live there are peaceful, happy, gentle people living a good life, and they have no allies. And the Danites say, "Land ripe for the picking." So they go back home, they gather up 600 warriors from the tribe, and they come back up that direction. So in verse 14, then the 5 men who'd gone to scout the country said to their brothers, "You know, there's a shrine here with a god and an ephod and a Levite priest. Let's stop by and get it, and we'll take it to our new digs." So they go in and they take it. The priest says, "What are you doing?" Verse 19, "Keep quiet, put your hand on your mouth, and come with us. Be with us a father and priest. Is it better for you to be priest in the house of one man or to be the priest of a tribe, a clan of Israel?" So the priest's heart was glad. Sounds like a good deal to me. So while he was protecting Micah's property at first, he's thrown in with the thieves, right? So he's going with them. So they leave. Now, interestingly, they put the little ones, the livestock and the goods in front of them. And the reason they do that, apparently it's not just 600 warriors, it's their whole tribe, right? Moving to this new land. They put them in front because they're expecting Micah to attack from the back, right? And sure enough, Micah comes up. "What are you doing?" Verse 24, he says, "You take my gods that I made." Well, that tells you a lot right there, doesn't it? "And the priests. What's the matter with you?" And the people of Dan say to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you and you lose your life with the lives of your household." I wouldn't make a fuss if I were you. We got 600 warriors here. Micah saw they were too strong for him, and he turned back and went home. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made and the priest who belonged to him, and they came to the land. The people were quiet and unsuspecting. They struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer because they had no allies. So the Danites rebuilt the city and lived in it. And they named the city Dan. And they set up the carved image for themselves. And then we learn the name of this itinerant Levite. He is Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses. This is a Levite in the line of Moses who is so far from God, so far from being devoted to God. It's a sad story. So they set up the shrine in Shiloh. How far they've fallen is exemplified by this story of this Levite. Because not only is he not devoted to God, He's just looking for the best deal he can find. I'll be your priest. I'll be your priest. Makes no matter, does it? So we get this story about this Levite. And it's almost like a PS at the end of the book of Judges. PS, here's what the people were really like, separate and apart from the military actions, separate and apart from, the people calling out to God and him responding and giving them a judge. Separate from all that, here's what daily life looked like for these people. It's not very lovely. It is very far from God, is the way to say it. And next week, when we cover the other story about the Levite, we'll see more of this. So we've got this tale, this collection of fragmentary stories that have been collected together for the instruction of the people. Because we can learn a lot from what's going on with these people. This downward spiral is not something that just happens to people a long time ago. This downward spiral is something that we need to be aware of. This downward spiral, this gradual moving away from God further and further, is a cautionary tale for us. Now, the bright spot is that God is holy and faithful and loving through all of it. Now, he is righteous and just, but he is responsive when the people call. When Samson asked God for help, even though Samson is not an admirable character, God loves Samson and responds to him. We can learn a lot about this. Even when we drift far away, even when we start using God's gifts for our own purposes, even when we fail to be devoted to God, God is faithful to us. And so we'll continue on this track next week and wrap up this study of Judges. And so I'd like for you this coming week, if you feel like you need to, review the story we're going to talk about next week, because it's brutal. But be thinking about this overall pattern that's described here, because this is a pattern that is important for us to advert to. This is a pattern we could fall into very easily. We talked about Jephthah, his approach to God being shaped by the culture around him, right? We talked about Gideon being fearful and cowering and taking a lot of convincing to trust God. I mean, we've got some examples here that are very modern day. And so we'll pull it all together next week. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll wrap up next week.